Good day and welcome to today's video about gold in Russia. In 2014, in response to the first sanctions imposed on Russia by the US, the G7 and the EU, which were imposed after the reunification of Crimea with the motherland, the Russian central bank started to reduce dramatically their holding of US Treasury bills and instead invest their reserves in gold. Since then, the value of Russia's gold reserves has increased by almost 40% to a record high of $229 billion. Now, this achievement is a testament to the efficacy of the strategy employed by the central bank, which was all involved in a concerted effort to accumulate the precious metal from 2014 onwards. Now, anybody looking at it can see that the price of an ounce of gold has increased from 1,100 to 1,500 to over 3,300 per ounce. According to the Bank of Russia, the value of their gold reserves increased by 38% to 229 million on the revaluation at the end of March. Since the beginning of 2022, the value of Russia's gold reserves has increased by 96 billion. Notably, the physical volume in the gold at the central banks has remained relatively stable over the last 3 years, maintaining a consistent amount around 75 million ounces, according to the available data. I mean, the reserves are increasing in line with the new gold price increase records. I mean, gold prices hit a new high on Wednesday, surpassing $3,330 per ounce, amid a weakening dollar and fears of recession as the US-China trade war intensifies. I mean, the Russian central bank began actively acquiring gold following the Crimea referendum. I mean, between 2014 and 2020, the price of gold fluctuated between 1,100 and 1,500 per ounce. And during this period, the Russian regulator purchased gold for the reserves on an annual basis, mostly Russian gold, of course, because Russia is one of the largest gold producers in the world, so they bought them from the local producers. And over a period of 6 years, a total of 40 million ounces were purchased. Consequently, the price of gold increased significantly, which is now almost up by three times as much. Now, before I continue, I'd like to make an appeal. If you like and enjoy my videos, you can help me fund the channel and my website, SCO to further develop it. You can do this by making a small donation, which you can do by clicking on the thanks button at the bottom of the video screen. Everybody who donates does get a personal thank you from me, and I'm thanking you all now. Thanks for watching as well, and please keep the comments coming. Do love to read them, do love to respond to them. Now, from 2014 to 2020, purchases in Russia's gold and forex grew by an average of 200 tons per year, which is about two-thirds of Russia's annual production, which is about 320 tons. Now, the growth rate in Russia's gold and foreign reserves slowed sharply in response to the onset of the global pandemic and the subsequent decline in Russia's budget revenues, coupled with a rise in expenses. Now, this was obviously further compounded by the imposition of economic sanctions and the subsequent increase in the Russian budget expenditures on its military campaign, according to Vladimir Chernov, who's an analyst at Freedom Finance Global. However, in monetary terms, the volume of gold in Russia's foreign exchange reserves just continued to grow. I mean, for instance, in 2024, it increased by 25%, and that again was largely due to a revaluation against the backdrop of ever-growing prices, according to Vladimir Yestyov, who's head of analytics at Zenit Bank. I mean, until 2014, Russia's strategy was to diversify its gold and foreign exchange, not so much in gold, but in the US dollar and the euro and other reserve currencies. Even had some in the Japanese yen, the British pound sterling and the Swiss franc. Now, the majority of these reserves were held in the most liquid and in-demand securities, either dollars, euros, and held in places like Euroclear for foreign trade. However, following the freezing of Russian reserves by Western countries in 2022, Russia logically refused to hold assets and currencies of unfriendly countries in its reserves, which were stored in foreign accounts. I mean, Gold is securely stored now in Russia, ensuring it remains out of reach of the thieving Western politicians. The composition of Russia's reserves has undergone significant changes. Following the financial crisis of 2008, the share of the country's gold in the reserves has grown from 2% to 10% by 2014, and the remaining 80-90% was back then in dollars and euros. But of course, by early 2022, the share had increased by 21%, so reflecting the shift in the reserve composition, and by 2025, it had surpassed 35%. Now that represents a 3.5 times growth over an 11-year period. Concurrently, the central bank initiated a systematic reduction in its share of the dollar and the euro, and by 2022, it completely divested from any Western currencies in its portfolio. The Chinese currency, the yuan, has seen a substantial increase in its share, and that's logical simply because that sharp decrease in the physical volumes of gold came along after the foreign exchange of 2022. Government's budgetary revenues and allocations for the defence industry and associated sectors, in addition to measures to support the domestic producers, the import substitution programme, the process and social welfare, and that expanded after 2022. So Russia's contribution to the reserves decreased. It didn't keep adding to them. And trade volumes with China, where both parties agreed to transition to national currency, made holding the yen a substantial move. And that's not unexpected. For the Russians to hold yuan, because it's a viable option, particularly if you're doing something like $200 billion worth of trade between each other. Although gold is sometimes considered an illiquid asset by economists, unlike US treasuries, which Russia got rid of, but that's not a very accurate assessment. Gold is probably the most liquid of any asset, and it's untraceable. You can shift it, move it, and you can never destroy it. So if you want something quickly, you basically can sell gold immediately, and there may not be a market for US Treasury. So Russian foreign trade is in Chinese yuan, but it would still have to convert it into yuan. So mandatory diversification of reserves is in place, and storing reserves exclusively in gold is too risky during the potential volatility. But it's still a popular safe haven asset, and that's why it's seen the surge in price during the economic uncertainty. This trend's evident amongst the trade tensions between the US and China, and that's why the gold price continues to go up. In challenging periods, the demand for gold reserves typically increases. We've seen this many occasions all over the world, and the situation is currently unfavourable to the Russian budget. Prices for Russian Urals crude fell below $60 a barrel in March, despite the budget needing a price of only $70 and a weaker ruble exchange rate than is currently the case. Now, the first quarter proved challenging for the budget, with the deficit significantly exceeding the planned indicators. So Russia underscores the need for to support the reserves. So foreign exchange reserves are normally the first to be liquidated, but gold were utilised. At the end of the day, selling gold at historically high prices is not that bad a move. It's logical. The finance ministry has already announced that the sale of gold in April will be in the framework of the budgetary rule, which has been in place for now the last 10 years. The last time the gold was sold by the finance ministry was back in January 2024. It's uncommon, but it's a usual practice for implementing the budget rule, according to Yestafiev. Global central banks rarely sell gold from their reserves. The asset is traditionally the last resort, and it's considered the insurance policy in case of a serious economic or geopolitical crisis. However, there's been instances in the past where central banks have sold their gold to support the currency of the country facing significant challenges such as economic crises, sanctions, high inflation, or capital outflows. You use the gold to support the currency. In some cases, countries may utilise their gold reserves to cover a budget deficit or settle external debt, although that's generally considered an extreme measure, as well as selling. Gold is perceived as a sign of economic weakness, according to Vladimir Chernov. Now, you only have to look at Russia in the 1990s as an example. At the time, Russia sold a significant portion of its gold reserves to cover its budget deficit and try and stabilise the ruble. That didn't work, and there wasn't much gold left anyway. However, in the last 2 decades, Russia, on the contrary, has been actively increasing its gold reserves, according to Chernov. For example, between 1999 and 2002, the Bank of England sold 395 tons of gold, which constituted almost half of its gold reserves. Now, these sales were made against the backdrop of some historically low gold prices, averaging at $275 an ounce. Now, this decision was made by the then UK Chancellor Gordon McRowan-Brown, and he's been called out as the most ridiculous financial decision ever, as in the last 25 years, gold has gone up by more than 10 times, where the euros he bought with the proceeds have lost their value over the years. And of course then there was France's aggressive sale of gold in the 1960s, which was driven by the need to support the franc and the finance the government spending among the deepening crisis in the Bretton Woods system, and also after the civil war in Algeria. However, since 2014, following Russia and other global central banks have begun to buy gold for their reserves much more actively. I mean, the trend reached its peak in 2022 when the US and the EU took a significant step that seemed unfeasible. They froze the dollar and euro reserves of a foreign country, Russia, as it was customary to keep them on their financial platforms for trading purposes. Now, this move has prompted many other countries to increase their gold holdings. So demand for gold from central banks has consistently exceeded 1,000 tons per year over the last 3 years. I mean, specifically in 2022, central banks purchased 1,136 tons. And in 2023, 1,051 tons, and in 2024, 1,045 tons. Now, that's according to data from Metals Focus and the World Gold Council. So we expect the current trade sanctions tariff schemes continues, that gold's only going to go higher. So that's what's happening with gold. Thanks for watching. Please like, share and subscribe, and hit the alert button so you get informed when I post a new video. And click on the thanks button at the bottom of the video screen for if you want to make a donation. Thank you.